Thanks for tuning in to Raffoon LLC. I'm Ron Raffoon, and as always, today we're talking about pipeline coatings and pipeline protection. Obviously, we have a little bit of a different format today. We're going to be doing an interview style format, which means this will probably be longer than most of the videos I do. Hopefully that's not a problem for you. If it goes too long, I might break it into two. Today, what I've done is I've invited a guest with me. This is Will Monroe. Will is a pipelines coating inspector. He was also a coatings applicator for years. We'll go into his background and experience in a few minutes. As usual, if you like this content and you want to see more of it, please subscribe to the channel. That way you get updates every time I go live. So let's jump right into it. Will, tell me a little bit about your experience.
Well, Ron, I started working in pipeline coating in 2006, right out of high school. Been doing it for 12 years. I've worked with all different kinds of coating systems for pipeline, just pipeline, other applications too, and FBE being the biggest one, because that's the main pipeline coating, but TSA and different insulation, two-part epoxies, and three-layer systems, polypropylene. It's just a very vast amount of products.
You were an applicator for 12 years, and then you went into inspection?
Yeah, so 2018 is when I actually went into the inspection side, but from 2006 to 2018 I was doing pipeline coating.
So you've been solely an inspector for the last 2 years?
Yes.
Okay. So tell me how you got from being an applicator to getting into inspection.
Well, after working with the same company for so long, I decided to get my CIP 1 just for my own benefit, to one day just progress in the career. So I got my NACE CIP 2, and once I got that, then I started actively, looking for.
So you were an applicator for 3 years with CIP 1, not doing any inspection.
Right.
And then 2018, you said you got CIP 2?
Yes.
Okay, and that's when you became a full-time inspector?
Yeah.
Okay, that's good. Do you have an intention of going for NACE 3, or some people just call it peer review?
Yeah, I do. It's been on my list, more certifications to get.
Okay.
Hopefully within the next calendar year, it'll be something that I can do.
So it's coming soon.
Yeah, I'm just trying to work right now.
Yeah.
And then later, that's something I'll do.
So do you know what is all included in becoming a NACE 3 peer-reviewed person?
Yes, it's 2 to 5 years experience, field experience as an inspector. Mm-hmm. And then once you have that experience, and you you have your NACE 1, your NACE 2 certification, and you go to your peer review. As per what you need to know, everything that's covered in the 1 and 2 is all the education you need through NACE that'll be covered by the peer review.
Okay, so basically, since you're a CIP 2, you already received all of the education and training you're going to get from NACE in order to become
correct. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's no additional learning from NACE to achieve your CIP 3.
No, I can go back through my NACE 1 book and my NACE 2 book and be completely prepared.
Okay.
To take it. That's personally not what I want to do.
Right.
Just because NACE covers a very wide variety of coatings.
Right.
Not just what I'm familiar with. So I would like to get hands-on experience with that, those applications before I try and get it.
Okay.
My NACE 3.
Good. Well, I think you already touched on this a bit, but in your opinion, what would you say is the single coating that an applicator or an inspector needs to know specifically for pipelines?
Specifically for pipelines, FBE coating. Doesn't matter what coating you're putting on the fill joint, if it's FBE or if it's two-part epoxy, no matter what, you're more than likely going to be tying into FBE. So you got to have knowledge of FBE.
Okay.
I think that is the cornerstone for pipeline coating.
I felt the same way. I just wanted to kind of see if we were on the same page. you actually, as an applicator, have probably more time on pipe than I do. So I wanted to see if you had the same feeling about it. So with that as a basis for understanding, in CIP 1, coating inspection for NACE, and CIP 2, how much time did you spend on fusion bond epoxy?
We really did not spend any. We spent a little bit, but not a lot at all.
How many days did you spend on FBE?
None. No days.
No day. How many hours did you spend on FBE?
Maybe an hour.
1 hour.
Mm-hmm. And it was mentioned CIP 1, mentioned in passing as an example of the curing mechanism that FBE is, which is the heat cure. So all my experience that I have and knowledge that I have with working with FBE, it comes from the field.
So I think that's an important point that we need to discuss, is that NACE Coating Inspection Program, CIP 1, 2, or 3, is designed as a broad range of education and minimum levels of training to understand how to inspect something for all the potential anti-corrosion coating industries, not specific to one. So when you're talking about getting an inspector who knows a lot about a specific industry, you're going to need somebody who actually has experience and time involved in that industry, because they're not going to give you everything you need in the coating inspection courses. So we'll move on from there. Given that you've had so much experience in the field as an applicator, are there any experiences that you have as an applicator where you were interacting with an inspector that would stand out to you?
That would stand out? Yes. So working a project in Bakersfield, I was working with a level 3 NACE inspector. The thing that jumped off the page with me was, doing a PQT before we start production, and this individual, as we begin to prep our test pieces, it started to lightly rain, and this individual insisted that we moved on with the process, which...
Okay, let me stop you there. So for those of you who don't know, there are 2 different tests that you can do before you start doing a project for any pipeline project. You have a PQT and a PPT. One, the PQT happens typically before you start any production, and you're actually doing physical testing and destructive testing on the coatings that you're testing. And then a PPT is a pre-production test, where mostly what you're doing is non-destructive, and you're just proving that you can perform the actual application in the field versus in the shop where you might have done a PQT. So in this case, they were doing a PQT, which means they were about to test the coating systems that they're applying destructively, and this guy told you that even though it was about to rain, you should apply it.
No, it was raining.
It was raining, okay.
Yeah, we blasted our 3 puck joints to get ready to apply the 3-layer system on each one, and while we were coating the first one with FBE, it started to rain. It was droplets falling on the test piece. So it's flash rusting. Actually had some bubbling in the coating from the moisture. Yeah, and he insisted we kept going.
Okay, well that is definitely not the way you're supposed to be doing things. So the issue with the PQT, that's just mind-boggling. Are there other things specific to interactions with inspectors that you've had that is geared directly to the FBE coating process?
Yes, Ron, one of the things that comes to mind is a lot of inspectors don't understand the application when it comes to the heating of the pipe. A lot of them aren't familiar with induction heating. So I would say maybe 75% of the conflicts that I've had out there with inspectors deal directly with that part of the process. The pipe temperature in order to apply the coating, and then how to monitor or get those readings. You know, for instance, I have a lot of inspectors that like to use IR guns
For checking temperatures?
for checking temperatures on the blasted steel to make sure that the temperature is correct for the coating application.
I gotta stop you there for a second. The reason I'm laughing is because blasted steel is a shiny surface with an angular profile. So there's no smooth surface that the IR gun can actually read off of. It will actually bounce and reflect the infrared all over the place. And so there's a property called emissivity that is at play there. And if you ask most people what emissivity is, not only will they not know what it is, they won't know how to calibrate or adjust their infrared gun to adjust for it. So anybody who tries to use an IR gun for a blasted, shiny surface or a very high temperature surface has no clue the capacity and capabilities of their infrared gun. So that's why I'm sorry I had to cut you off on that. It's vitally important to me that people understand emissivity. Please continue on about the induction heating and the heating process.
So with the use of temp sticks, the fact that they're made to melt at a particular temperature, I've never had any issues with a temp stick failing to do its job,
right.
Whereas I've had issues with being told that I'm 50, 60 degrees off from the temp stick, what my temp stick's reading because they're using an IR gun and shutting down the whole process. And other times, they make many different ranges of temperatures for temp sticks for different coatings. So a lot of times we use them to make sure that we're hitting certain marks before we apply. And we also can apply, mark the pipe all the way around to make sure that we're getting, the correct temperature all the way around. And another thing is that I run into a lot is being told I'm not allowed to use a temp stick when it's approved. It's an approved product. It's in the specification. I can use it.
Well, I mean, we've already clearly pointed out that you can't use an IR gun, and if you can't use an IR gun and you can't use a temp stick, what's your option then?
You really don't have a lot unless you have a direct contact probe that has a really fast reading time, and it's within a certain range. That would be one option.
I know that's the option that I like if you can stay on the bottom end of the range. Mm-hmm. But what I've seen is with those, like you mentioned, it has to have a fast read time, because otherwise, if you're shooting for 463 on that thing, it's not picking up the changes in the steel temperature fast enough.
No.
And then you have to use a temp stick rated for 500 so you don't go over the max temperature.
Correct.
So, personally, it sounds like you agree with me. I think temp sticks are the best way.
I think they're the most reliable way because they're engineered for that purpose.
Yeah, chemistry is going to outdo an IR gun every time.
Every time.
Yeah. So those heating issues that you talked about, it brings up a couple of issues in my background that have kind of stood out over the years. Multiple examples of these, but one in particular just drives me crazy because one of the things that an inspector has to do is verify that the product they're using is the product that should be going on the pipe. That's every inspector for every industry, right?
I would agree that is probably one of the key things.
So I had a project this one time, and we were supplying all the equipment, but they decided that they wanted to get their powder from a third party because they could get it cheaper. It wasn't a typical thing we allowed, but they went ahead and did it anyway. So months went by, these guys were out there doing their job and applying coating. The equipment comes back, and I go out and I inspect the equipment, and I could not believe my eyes. I looked at this equipment, and I knew that what they had been applying was Scotch Coat 134, which is a post-bake FBE that's applied very similar to any other standard powder coating. which means that when you apply it, it's got to be in the 300 range, and then you have to bake it for another 25 to 30 minutes for it to be fully cured. The way these guys were applying it with this equipment, the only thing that they could do is get a preheat and apply the powder. So it hit the surface, gelled, and went on. But I guarantee that not one joint on that project is properly cured. I don't know where that pipe's at. I wouldn't tell you if I did. But, I mean, that tells you the inspector didn't do his job just on verifying it was the right product. Another one, which is directly related to heat, was there was an 8-inch project out in West Texas. And they called me up because every single pipe joint had spider cracking on it. And they said we had defective powder and that our equipment was damaging the pipe, and so it was causing issues with the coating. And I went out and checked it out, and I tell them, just show me what you're doing. So they run through the process, and during that time, they didn't have a temp stick in hand. There was no way that they were measuring it. And so when they finished and they applied the coating, I let them do their whole process. And I said, what temperature did you apply that at? And the applicator said, I don't know. And I said, so how did you decide that it was time to put coating on? He said, well, the inspector told me that I had to do this for 2.5 minutes, and then it was going to be ready to go. So what they were doing was, when they started, the temperature outside was 90 degrees, so they had a 90-degree starting temperature, and after 2.5 minutes, they were hitting, on average, in the 450 to 480 range, and they thought it would be faster if they just timed it. But when there was a temperature change, and the pipe was starting at a different temperature, they didn't accommodate for it. So they were under-curing all of their coatings. And I can tell you, first-hand experience, that an under-cured coating that is applied just above the melting point, when it is somewhat dry to touch, it's got to be one of the prettiest coatings I've ever seen.
Yeah,
If it looks too good, it's probably under-cured. But, I mean, that was purely driven by an inspector choice. Yeah, have you seen anything like that?
I've seen something almost exactly like that. As an applicator, I got called out to do a failure analysis on some pipe down in southwest Texas, which is normally an inspector's duty to do failure analysis, but the inspector couldn't figure out what the problem was, so they sent me out. It was in the middle of December, January, cold time of year, usually around 30 degrees in the morning. I went out and it was spider cracking, like you were saying, and so I did the same thing. I told them, I said, well, let me see how you're doing this. And so the induction coil is ran from a generator that has amps getting pushed through it, and that's what causes the induction to take place. Right. For those who don't know, the higher you have your amp set, the faster it's going to heat the pipe because the more energy's going through the coil. Right. This inspector had instructed these guys to turn the amps higher up so that they can get more production done. And that was a direct result of the spider cracking due to the fact that the coil did not have the time allowed for the heat to penetrate the steel long enough to make sure that that pipe stayed hot for that coating to fully cure out.
Right. So you had the same thing. I was just thinking about it when you were talking that I've seen an issue where the inspector wanted to test a coil to make sure it was heating properly without it being on the pipe. I'll explain why that's laughable, but have you?
I've had that exact thing happen to me. It was on offshore, and we were having issues with an aero dual coat, and our issue was the parent coating was blistering every time we would heat the pipe. Yeah. This is another inspector who insisted on using an IR gun. He did not like my tent stick, and during this whole process, I showed him the best I could, and I never really got through to him until he had his superiors actually came out to the job site. I would heat the pipe up gradually to determine at what point blistering was occurring.
Right.
And the blistering was occurring at around 200 degrees. So, I mean, that tells me, one, I'm not overheating the pipe, which I already knew that because I never went, I'd always stop when my tent stick was melted.
Right.
He also insisted that my equipment was not properly functioning. So during a conference call with my company, he insisted on taking the induction coil off the pipe, running it, but not only that, but using an IR gun again to aim at the leads to see how hot it was getting. And
So,
at that point, I was not on that conference call, but at that point, my company knew what I was dealing with on this project. And this was another level 30 years of experience coating inspector who probably had never worked on a pipeline before.
yeah, there you go. There's a level 3 for you. So the reason this is so laughable is that induction heating works on a magnetic field basis. So, my story that I had was this guy didn't think it was heating right, and it was lunchtime, and he wanted to put a turkey in the middle of it, because if it got that hot, he should be able to basically flash cook his turkey. And
I would have told him to eat it.
There's no metal in a turkey, so there's not going to be a magnetic field, so you're not going to have a heated pipe or heated turkey. So, for this guy to want to take it off and use an IR gun to read a magnetic field, I mean, I can tell you, we talked about emissivity. IR guns definitely don't do squat for magnetic fields. So you can see that this 30 years of NACE 3 experience really translated into some amazing skills on the pipeline field. Oh, man. All right, I felt like I was rambling on there, but I have one more point when it comes to reading wet film thickness. Just to give you guys an idea, when I personally was in the CIP1 course, the intent of reading a wet film thickness for most applications is because when you're applying a liquid coating or a paint on something, most of them have some sort of solvent. And when you're doing your final DFT measurement, the DFT measurement is going to be different than the wet film thickness measurement. And so what they're doing is they're trying to figure out what the wet film thickness is so that they can then back off from it what the solvent content is so that they can figure out what their dry film thickness is finally going to be. Well, when I was in this course, the instructor in CIP1 literally said out loud, all coatings have a solvent in them. I immediately threw my hand up and I said, what about 100% solids epoxies and fusion bond epoxies? He said, well, I suppose those ones don't. I said, so not all coatings have them. And with that being the case, you don't need a wet film thickness because they're going to dry at the same thickness that you put them on wet. So that came straight out of the mouth of a CIP1 instructor who was teaching to a broad group of people. And I'd say in that class, very few people actually had pipeline experience to even know what my question was. So that gives you an idea of the level of training that NACE offers these inspectors. I'm not saying that it's the inspector's fault. I'm saying that industries have specifics that need to be taught and need to be learned. So moving on from there, I don't want to say all inspectors are bad. That's not the objective of this video. Inspectors have value, inspectors have use, especially ones that are good. But I can tell you that the perception that I've seen in my years is not that from the aspect of an applicator or from a contractor. And we've talked before, I think you feel the same way. I mean,
I think that the number one thing that people think before they go out on a job and actually meet, their inspector or project managers or whatever, is that a lot of people have this feeling that the job is going to be a pain because they expect their inspector to be incompetent.
that's a terrible starting point.
It is, and like you said, not all inspectors. There are lots of great inspectors out there. I have worked with great, phenomenal people.
Sure.
And it bottoms down to really the more your inspector knows and more experience he has, the smoother the job runs.
Right.
And a lot of times, just I've had the jobs where from the very start the job was a nightmare, just because there were conflicts with different aspects, things that ended up ultimately end up getting remedied, but it slows down the job.
Yeah.
When
Is that intentional?
sometimes it is. Sometimes it is. I've had I've been on jobs where I've had inspectors that would go back and damage the product after the fact. And
Is that an assumption, or you can?
no, this was they were caught in the act of doing it. They were.
What's the intent there?
The only intent that I can see is that the longer it takes us to do the work and go back and redo the work, the longer they get paid. The more they're out there, it justifies the reason for being there, because they're finding flaws, and it seemed kind of odd to us because we had a 87 to 90% failure rate.
That's crazy.
Which has never happened. We've never had a failure rate that high.
Right.
In the history of, or at least in my history, as an applicator, and it wasn't just me. I was with a group of 10 other applicators.
Right.
And 97, or I'm sorry, that the high percentage rate of failures was definitely catching us off guard. And ultimately, our bosses got involved. This was an international project, so this was not in the continental U.S. They ended up suspecting that these damages were being done. Well, just intentional.
Right.
They didn't know who was doing it.
Oh, okay.
They just thought it was intentional, because the way that the damage. The kind of damage it was, it just was weird. So ultimately, they started to look into it, and then they actually found out it was the two inspectors that were intentionally causing the damage.
It sounds to me like those inspectors are actually a little bit more involved in the process than some of the ones I've seen.
Yeah, a lot of them don't pay attention to what's going on when you need them. If you're going to do a certain test, or inspection, a lot of times you can't find them, and you start looking around and they're sitting in their truck watching Netflix, or, they're not hands-on with it,
Right.
So you basically do everything that they're supposed to verify, and you write it down, and at the end of the day, you give them your findings,
Right.
and then they go and they copy and paste it and put it in a report.
So they're data entry clerks.
Yeah, a lot of them. Not all of them, but a lot of them are. I've ran into that a lot.
You ever have an instance where, they're just nitpicking things that shouldn't even be looked at?
Yeah, that happens. That doesn't happen as often as people that just don't know what's going on. The nitpicky ones, I find, are the ones that they've got a little bit of experience, but they're basically what I would think is someone that went to a NACE course, NACE class, and that's it.
Right.
So they're going by what's in the book, and that's it. So when something's just acceptable but not right, and then they're like, well, you can't,
Right.
it's got to be like this.
So personally, what I found, and I had a company I worked with in California that they would send newbie inspectors to work with me to basically find out, are these guys willing to learn and expand their knowledge and get better as inspectors, or are they just here to draw a paycheck? And it was easy to tell the guys who were stopping projects frequently just so that they could write something down and say, look, I saw this, look, I saw that, and they weren't working with the contractor to build a relationship, to understand the process, to improve the quality, to support the owner of the pipeline in producing a better product. They were just there basically trying to validate that they need to be there and validate their existence rather than improving the quality of the work. And they'd ask me, is this guy ready to move on and do something new? And I'd be honest with them. And there are people out there who are, like you said, they're new and they're looking to justify their existence rather than improve the project, which is truly what the intent of an inspector should be, is to improve the project. Having a certification is not something that gives you carte blanche to say, I know how to do all of it. There is other components involved that have to do with experience. I mean, at some point, we've all heard those who can't teach. Well, in the coatings world, we think those who can't do inspect. And we find that just out of experience to be commonly true. Well, I think we've covered quite a bit today. This video could be going a little longer than I even anticipated. I think we've probably looked at the potential pitfalls that can come from being hiring a coating inspector or just involved with a coating inspector. Let me ask you this question. If somebody came to you and said, I'm CIP2 or I'm CIP3 or I'm peer-reviewed coating inspector, would that be enough for you to say that they would be good at inspection on a pipeline?
I would certainly hope so, especially being a NACE 3.
Yeah.
You would hope that they would know their stuff when it came to pipeline and FBE and that sort of thing. But based on that statement alone, I'd have to say no.
No. Okay, so if having a certification from the most recognized industry leader isn't enough, in your opinion, what does it take to be a good pipeline coating inspector?
For the actual inspection part of it, the only thing, I'm not saying that the programs don't help give you a base knowledge, experience. Experience is what's going to drive that job to success.
Okay.
And a good working relationship between the inspector and the contractor. I just find those with the inexperience to not be the smoothest of projects.
Right.
So
Experience. Well, speaking in terms of experience, I can tell you personally from my experiences with Will that if you are looking for a pipeline inspector who actually knows what they're doing and can help you get a better finished project, there's Will here and there's others that I know and can personally recommend. If you are facing a project where you're having issues with the inspector and you think that it might be an inspector thing, sometimes they just need a little bit of training. And I can tell you, Raccoon LLC, we will send people out that are qualified to train the inspector on how to do his job as well. Oftentimes, it'll be myself that's going out and doing that. So feel free to give us a call if you need Will's information. My contact is always linked here. Feel free to give me a call and I can connect you with Will. For now, I just want to say thanks for coming out.
Yeah,
I
thanks for
appreciate
having me
you
out.
doing this with me, and I think it was a good learning thing for just about anybody who watches. You know, whether you've been in the industry for 30 years or whether you're brand new, I think it's important that people understand where the pitfalls are in particularly pipeline coatings, and that there are resources that can help you to overcome them. So
Absolutely.
thanks for coming out. For those of you watching, if you like this, again, please like and subscribe, and we hope to see you on the next video. Thanks.